But yeah, we've got our DOJ statement of interest that was filed. It's short, right? It's about 7 pages long, but it's kind of a big deal. They've said some interesting words here. You know, we're here about, what is it, 2 days? I think tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, I don't remember exactly what day, that it's scheduled for the settlement to actually be approved, right? We've got that scheduled coming, and it looks like it's going to be approved. I mean, I don't think that we've got any issue with what the DOJ is saying in terms of the settlement actually being approved, because interestingly, the DOJ doesn't say we don't necessarily, like, we want you to not approve it, but they've made some other threats. So I've kind of gone through and highlighted some things that I want to touch on, so that we can kind of get an idea of what the DOJ really wants from us. And to start with, at the very beginning here, we've got the DOJ saying that the United States continue, when they say the United States, that means like them, right? They continue to scrutinize policies and practices in residential real estate industry that may stifle competition. And they say there too, it's a matter of public record that the U.S. has an open investigation into these practices. And what they actually cite here is the case where the NAR and DOJ entered into a settlement agreement like 4 years ago at this point, I feel like. Well, that was a while back now, that they entered into this settlement agreement. The DOJ then pulls out of the settlement agreement, and NAR has now sued DOJ over that, and that's pending. I believe that's ready to go before the Supreme Court, actually, to see does DOJ have to hold up their end of the deal. But there's other stuff going on in that case, right? So I have heard and seen articles and talked to people where the DOJ is sending out subpoenas to associations around the country, particularly about custom form, like the association created forms. You know, we don't really use association created forms in Oklahoma for the most part, but DOJ is actually subpoenaing associations who create forms for sort of antitrust investigation stuff. And so they continue to monitor us, see what's going on, and they're absolutely investigating us. Here's where we start to get into the meat of it, though. DOJ, they start out and saying, look, because the United States, they're not a party to this litigation, then it doesn't limit their ability to enforce antitrust laws. And in the green there, including to seek greater relief for the conduct at issue here. So they're coming into the court, and remember, this is set for approving the settlement. DOJ is coming in and saying, hey, we have an interest in this, and we have the right to continue to enforce antitrust laws. This does not settle the antitrust case with the United States. This is between these two parties, and we could seek greater relief than what's happening here. So we could go beyond and ask the court to do more than what we're settling here. Then we get into, basically they've said the U.S. doesn't take any position on whether the settlement satisfies Rule 23E. And this is just like antitrust federal law. But they've said that the proposed settlement includes a provision requiring buyers and their brokers enter into a written agreement before the buyer tours any home. And that provision itself raises independent concerns under the antitrust laws. So this is one of the two big pieces here. One is the threat of what DOJ is doing and their plans to do, it looks like. And the second thing is this statement specifically pointing out the buyer agreement rule that's now a part of the practice changes in our MLS rules, saying that rule may in and of itself violate antitrust laws. And we'll get into why they say that and kind of what that might look like. But they say, here's two things, court, that you could do. You could either throw that rule out, eliminate that provision, or the parties could agree to, or make it known that the settlement does not create any immunity or defense under antitrust laws, right? So they're basically saying, like, look, just because you've entered into this settlement agreement, just because it's been approved, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you're immune or you have any sort of defense if we decide to come after everybody after this, right? So we've got some threats going. They're coming in with some strong language, and it only gets stronger. And this is, we're basically going paragraph by paragraph through this thing here, right? It says the class actions before the court challenge blanket unilateral offers of compensation. It harms buyers, it harms sellers because sellers fear that there will be steering if we don't have offers of compensation, right? If you've heard me talk before, you've heard me talk about this. The DOJ is continued to have this belief that offers of compensation are problematic. We should be getting rid of them. And that's what the class action was kind of about. They say it doesn't benefit buyers. It insulates buyer brokers from meaningful competition, and it decreases the incentive for brokers to offer improved or lower cost services, right? So they continue to say, we don't think offers of compensation should exist anywhere. And this is something they said in the Nozelek case, and the DOJ is very strong about this, is one of the issues that they have with the settlement is that, yes, it gets rid of the offer of compensation in the MLS, but it doesn't get rid of it altogether, and they have a problem with that. They've said here that under the proposed settlement, NAR would prohibit brokers from making the offers of compensation on the MLS, but it still expressly allows offers of compensation off the MLS and just says you can't do it in the MLS. And the DOJ has a problem with that. I mean, by my reading, and I'm not the only person here, DOJ seems to even want to prohibit sellers from making offers of compensation, right? I don't know how they get there, but they are so strongly against offers of compensation at all that's their end game. They don't like the settlement in one respect because of that, which is why we've kind of been talking about like, okay, fine, put it in the contract. We don't have to make offers of compensation. That's certainly an option. That's clearly what DOJ wants from us here. All right, it goes on and says that when we're evaluating a class action lawsuit here, the court, their job is just to determine, is this fair, adequate, and reasonable? And I point this out because what the DOJ is saying here is, look, you've got a civil settlement under these laws, and that's just, is it perfect? It doesn't have to be. It just has to be fair and adequate. But then they go on to talk about what their job is as the DOJ. And they basically say, look, this civil settlement does not resolve past violations or whether any of these changes comply with antitrust laws. They're just saying this is an agreement between these parties, and it doesn't necessarily mean that any of these changes have fixed anything to do with the antitrust laws. It doesn't fix any violations in the past. We can still come after you. And down there at the bottom, this is where it gets really interesting to me, is it says a court may also restrict conduct that might otherwise be lawful to preclude the revival of the illegal practices. Okay, let's unpack this because this is wild to me. And I haven't read these citations yet. I haven't had time to, but the DOJ is coming in and they are saying that, look, we could go to court and we could ask that court to restrict things that you're doing that are lawful, simply because those things that you're doing might revive the illegal practices that we have concerns over. So when we're talking about things like an offer of compensation, for example, whether that comes from the seller or the listing broker, I mean, the DOJ is kind of taking a position here of like, we can ask the court to restrict that conduct, even though it's might otherwise be perfectly lawful, because we believe it might lead towards illegal practices happening again. That's crazy, man. That's wild. That is a big statement here for the DOJ to make. And that's what gives me some real concern here, is that we've got this settlement. We've entered into these practice changes. They're saying some of these we don't like. Oh, and by the way, we might even ask the court to restrict stuff that you do that's otherwise completely lawful because we think that it leads to antitrust violations. That's a lot. I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but that's kind of a lot. So let's keep going. They said because the United States did not participate in this litigation or the settlement, then it doesn't preclude any enforcement actions by us. Compliance with these rule changes and everything that you're doing does not afford any defense to such enforcement action, right? So they're saying, yeah, do what you want to do. This is literally what the DOJ is kind of saying. If you wanted to like kind of put it into slang terms here, they're like, do your thing. We don't care. We're still coming. Do your thing. We don't think it's good enough. We don't care. We're still coming. That's what the DOJ is saying in this brief, right? They're telling us, like, we don't care what you've agreed to. We don't care what the settlement says. We don't care what the practice changes are. We don't think that the practice changes are necessarily the right thing. And by the way, none of this settles any of your beef with us. Just keep going. In the green down here, it says, if the court approves this settlement, it should clarify that the approval does not address whether settlement prevents and restrains any current antitrust violations or these past violations or anything related to antitrust laws, right? They're basically saying, great, you civil litigants, you've settled this case. Again, we don't care. We don't care. We're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to come. So they're not saying, court, don't approve this settlement. They're saying, hey, parties, we think that you've got some problems here. And if you go ahead and settle it in this way, that's fine. But it doesn't have anything to do. So when we come and we now sue you as as the United States government comes and says, we're going to sue you because we don't care about that settlement. You violated antitrust laws. We're going to come after you. This settlement that you've agreed to, the money that you've paid, the changes that you've made, none of it matters for what we care about as the Department of Justice. That's what they're telling us here. That's what they're telling us here. Goes on to say that the new provision that requires buyers and brokers to make written agreements may harm buyers and limit how brokers compete for clients, right? So now they're starting to point out a little bit. They're not super specific here, but they're pointing out that this buyer-broker agreement or this buyer agreement rule is in potentially an antitrust violation. They don't clearly say how, but they say that it might be. But they say that it harms buyers and limits brokers how they compete with each other. And they say that it closely resembles other cases where there's been a restriction among competitors that could limit rather than enhance competition for buyers among buyer brokers. And they point to a couple of cases here where they've said an agreement among competitors to withhold from their customers a particular service that they desire, and then an agreement that prohibited information useful to consumers from being distributed through MLS feeds to public websites. And so basically what they're saying here is, as best I can tell, as I'm kind of reading between the lines a little bit here, is that the DOJ is saying, when you enter into this settlement practice that says, hey, you have to get a buyer to sign a buyer agreement. And you read the rest of the briefs, the plaintiffs' lawyers in this case filed like a 400 and something page like brief and support on why the court should approve the settlement. And they point to a lot of things as to why this is good. DOJ is coming in and saying, look, you've got an agreement here that you have to do these things, and it has two effects. One, it harms buyers, and two, it prevents brokers from competing in different ways. We're putting restrictions on how we do business, and that stifles competition. This is interesting to me. And I get what they're saying, where the part at least about they've quoted this case that says withholding from consumers a particular service that they desire, where it's like, well, I want somebody to show me a house and I don't want to sign a buyer agreement. It's like, well, but I have to get you to sign one under these rule changes that I have and this kind of stuff. And this is really tricky, because go back to the Nozelet case and the things that the DOJ has said, and they've said, we do not want brokers on the listing side to be making offers of compensation. We don't want brokers on the listing side to be negotiating with sellers on how much the buyer agent is going to get paid. We want buyers to sit down with buyers agents and negotiate their compensation, and that's how they work it out. And then they can go ask the seller for it in a term and a contract if they want to. And we don't think that offers of compensation should exist anywhere. This is what the DOJ has said clearly. It's just, there's court records of it. It's in filings. So we entered this settlement, and that settlement says, hey, you have to enter into some kind of agreement. It doesn't even say really what that is. You have to have just some written agreement that basically says compensation is negotiable and not set by law, and here's what my compensation is for these services I'm providing. That's really what the settlement says on buyer agreements. And you have to do it before you show them a house. And now the DOJ is coming in and saying, yes, we want buyers and sellers to sit down and negotiate compensation up front. But they're now saying, but we don't think that you should force people to do it before they show houses. Well, it's like, what do you want? Do you want us to sit down and negotiate compensation with buyers up front? And if so, how do you want us to do this? Like, will you just tell us what you want? Because you don't want us making offers of compensation. And now you're telling us you don't want us to have to enter into some sort of written agreement with the buyer before they look at houses. So what do you want from us, right? This is the problem that I kind of have with this is they haven't said it. They haven't said this is what we want from you. And this is what's concerning here because we just don't know. They're saying this isn't it. And the way you used to do it isn't it, but they haven't told us what they want. So I don't know. This is pretty wild to me. So we continue to go back and it says, look, that you may not show a house, even a no obligation showing without first obtaining a written agreement, that this is a problem. And so the concerns remain that the broker agreement rule may limit how brokers compete. Right, so we've been concerned about buyers and sellers. Since when is the DOJ concerned about us, brokers? And now they're saying, oh, this might limit how brokers can compete. I guess they've been concerned about that and that they want buyer brokers to be competing on price. They want compensation to come down. They want commission levels to come down. And the way they think that would work is if we basically tell buyers, like listing agents, you can't make offers of compensation. Sellers, we don't think you should be making offers of compensation. So buyers and buyers agents, you guys have to figure it out on your end. And by default, then the market would drive that to reduce compensation levels. And I guess for whatever reason that they're saying that this buyer agreement rule, because that stifles competition amongst buyers agents, that now creates new antitrust concerns. And again, they continue to say throughout this thing that any settlement does not preclude future antitrust scrutiny. So we just continue to see the DOJ playing a very strong hand here. They never say in this thing, don't approve the settlement. They say, look, we've got a problem with the buyer agreement rule. Maybe more. They just said, like, kind of, for example, we have a problem with the buyer agreement rule. They say that they have a problem, I think, with the settlement as a whole because it just doesn't resolve all their concerns. They haven't said specifically what they want. They kind of said, get rid of the buyer agreement rule, which I don't know how that necessarily fixes what their concerns are with respect to offers of compensation, because they didn't say prohibit offers of compensation. So what can we expect? This, to me, there's sort of a couple issues that we got to wait and see. DOJ, to me, is clearly saying we are going to do some kind of enforcement action. Like, this seems completely clear to me that they're like, we are coming for you. We're going to do something. And of course, look, like, you and I, there's nothing we can do about this, right? Like, this is so far above all of our pay grades that, like, there's nothing we can do about this aside from being prepared for whatever changes might come. DOJ is saying that they're coming for the real estate industry, which they have been for 100 years. This is nothing new. This is not the first time we've had the DOJ on us. This is just the next phase of it. But what's interesting is we are going through a change in administration. And what is that effect going to have? I mean, we're seeing a lot of stuff, if you watch the media, about when the Trump administration comes in, that there seems to be probably a pretty good chance that they are going to do pretty large scale gutting of a number of agencies, right? All you gotta do is look at Elon Musk's Twitter feed, right? His X feed. And you can see that, like, there's a strong push to, like, really gut a lot of different things. And of course, Trump has some bones to pick with the DOJ, right? This is not a secret. He's probably going to remove a large number of people at the DOJ. So what effect does that have on this? Like, who knows? Does it delay things? Does it make things completely change? Really, really hard to say. But what we do know is that the DOJ, as they're saying right now, they're pretty clearly forecasting that they want to come after the real estate industry, and they want to do so pretty aggressively. So again, don't necessarily put all the eggs in a change of administration basket. I mean, there's still people involved in the administration that are coming in that have very strong enforcement antitrust kind of beliefs, right? That's not clear that they're like, oh no, we shouldn't do antitrust enforcement. That's not the case at all. And so who knows? Like, this is the problem that we have as the world's largest trade organization, right? They don't like that we get together. They don't like cooperation. They don't like that the MLS has things like the compensation rules that we used to have that are now gone. They don't like any of that. And so here we are now waiting to see what happens. So in the meantime, as of today, right, this settlement is almost, I would be shocked if it didn't get approved in the next day or two, whenever that is scheduled for. The practice changes are in effect. Nothing has changed that. That is going to continue to be in effect until such time as something else happens. So for the DOJ, We're going to look and see down the road. So what you need to be doing in the meantime is paying attention to the news. See what like the real estate news, see what the DOJ wants, see what people are saying. Pay attention to those emails and things that come out, because that's going to give us some indications as to what that future may hold. So prepare yourself. Go read this brief. There's probably not much there besides kind of what I told you. We pretty much went through the whole thing, but I want you to be prepared for it. This is kind of to me, a bit of a big deal. Again, I don't know what the long-term outcome is going to be, except to say that the DOJ, as we see it right now, they don't like us. I don't know what to say about that. They don't like us, but they never have. So here we are, right? Throw some questions in the chat if you've got any. I'm happy to stick around for a minute and answer some questions if you do. I don't know if this was helpful or not. This was kind of spur of the moment. I wanted to jump on and talk about this stuff and hopefully give you some insight into where DOJ's concerns are. Again, do they have concerns over other parts of the practice changes? It's possible. We know that removal of the offer of compensation from the MLS, but the fact that we can still advertise an offer of compensation, we know they don't want that. They didn't mention that in their brief hardly at all, but they clearly have a problem with that. So, we know that's on the chopping block if they can make it happen. And who knows if the DOJ can actually win. Even if they do come after us, who the heck knows? We'll have to see how that works out. So, we'll see. So stay tuned. Listen, if you appreciate again, you guys being here, please stay tuned to what we're doing. And we'll see what happens. So Heidi says, so does not using a buyer agreement no longer need to be enforced? No. So we still have to use a buyer agreement, right? Because nothing about all this is the DOJ saying how they feel about the settlement, right? All we have is the DOJ saying, this is what we think, this is how we feel about it. And that at this point is meaningless, right? It doesn't change anything. The MLS rules are already changed, so nothing has changed that. And even if the settlement didn't get approved or something, unless the court actually comes in and issues some sort of injunction that says you can't do that, everything that's changed is still changed. The question is what will happen down the road? And that's what we don't know. That's what we're going to just kind of have to wait and see. So in terms of using buyer agreements, the MLS rule changes before showings, that is all still in effect. And the MLS is still going to enforce that. And the reason why is because this settlement is still pretty much going to go into effect. And that does require enforcement. So the DOJ, we almost don't really even care about at this point because nothing's changing in terms of the DOJ. So yeah, everything is still in full force and effect. Doug says, are other industries where DOJ has completely scrapped an entire industry's compensation methods? Not that I have seen, not that I'm aware of. Look, I took an antitrust class in law school. It's not like I've practiced antitrust law. That's definitely a pretty focused kind of thing. So I don't know, I don't have that extensive of a DOJ experience, but not that I'm aware of that the DOJ has gotten this involved in the compensation, not for a very long time. I mean, I'm sure long in the past, but in recent years, certainly nothing that I'm aware of. Sarah said, curious if DOJ issues of the past that were able to be resolved, because it sounds like other issues were able to be resolved with them. But yeah, in fact, just my timeline, right? I can't remember time periods anymore. The DOJ and the Realtor Association have entered into settlement agreements in the past to resolve issues. In fact, that's what this pending whole lawsuit, we had one entered into, change in administration, they withdrew from it. We've entered into settlement agreements with the DOJ in the past. So, what's going to happen? I mean, the DOJ, if they sue the association, then it's just who knows, right? They'll litigate it. It'll take time. It's going to be a long drawn process. So yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, issues can get resolved. Maybe they'll settle it. Maybe we'll find some middle ground. Again, none of this is going to happen in the next 2 days. I suspect if something changes and the settlement doesn't get approved, I'll be back here. We'll certainly be talking about it. That's for sure. Let's see. Guess someone's saying our incoming president should be pro-agent considering his past business mode. I mean, maybe. Listen, I don't know. I mean, this, especially on these kinds of deals, how much is this on a president's radar? And really, do developers love real estate agents? Not always. I think there's certainly some unknowns here. And again, there are certainly some people that the administration has been talking about bringing in who actually have pretty strong beliefs on aggressive antitrust enforcement, and not letting like large corporate entities and things like that exist for the purpose of potentially harming consumers. So it's not strictly a policy issue that's always really crystal clear. So we will certainly see what comes. So maybe. Got another question here. Do these DOJ future rulings also affect real estate agents, not just NAR members? Probably yes. I mean, if the DOJ, that's hard to say. But if they come in and say, look, offers of compensation shouldn't exist, then yeah, I mean, that would pretty much affect everybody, because that's more about the harm to consumers. That's really hard to tell, to see exactly. I mean, so far everything's been about realtor associations, because like the vast majority of real estate agents are realtor members, right? Let's say for some reason there was like 75% of agents and brokers decided to leave the realtor association, and now it's like 25% of the industry are realtors. How does that change things? That's just a dynamic we don't have and we don't know. So at least as of the moment, because they look at it as NAR is the industry, and because we changed these MLS rules, even though a lot of our MLSs, MLSs are starting to open it up where you don't have to be a realtor member to join the MLS. And so even if that happens, but all these practice changes were MLS rules. So even if you're not a realtor member, you still have to follow these practice changes, because that's about being a participant in the MLS, not being a realtor. So that's where we have these dynamics where it's not just the realtor aspect is tied up in it, because they own the MLSs and we're all tied in together and all that kind of stuff. So could that change in the future? Possibly. But at least as of now, I would say, yeah, it pretty much broadly affects everybody. And saying like, I'm going to leave the association, functionally speaking, I don't see how that would change a whole lot or anything like that. So, hey, you guys are fantastic. It's been about half an hour. Thank you so much for tuning in. We had 50 something people. I love it. You guys are fantastic. It's a spur of the moment kind of thing. I really appreciate it. I think I recorded it, hopefully. And so we'll try to put it up on our YouTube channel as well for anybody. But otherwise, you guys have been fantastic. We may do more of these. If you like it, if you liked it, give me a thumbs up, let me know. And hopefully we'll be able to do some more of these lives in the future. Thank you all. You guys are fantastic. Really, really appreciate it.